I watched a video yesterday and a chap had paid $27 for a burger in a place called Weldborough in Tasmania, and I got to thinking about what we'd paid over the last couple of years for burgers as we travel a little bit around Australia. Now, not about to get into food reviews, but may talk from time to time about food for the common man, because I am a very common man. I like to be able to identify the ingredients, spell the ingredients, pronounce the ingredients, and I don't need it sitting on some bed of this or whatever. Just give it to me, I'll demolish it, wolf it down, and we can move on. I do remember once something came with this sprig of green stuff. I thought I'd better eat that first because waste doesn't come into my vocabulary. Man, it was awful. I think my wife said it was coriander, so got to be careful of those sorts of things. So we're going to do a little comparison of 4 places that we've been to over the last couple of years. Yunta in South Australia, Marion Bay down on the Yorke Peninsula in South Australia, a place called Belyando Crossing, kind of central Queensland, and Windorah, definitely Western Queensland. And I'm going to talk about the Don Vito Corleone, Godfather, the GOAT, the greatest of all time in Australian burgers. Well, maybe not, because I haven't been to every burger joint. It's the GOAT from what I've seen. An honourable mention of a burger that just thinking about gives me severe heart palpitations and aortic contraction. You'll almost need a stomach pump if you have it. So let's have a look at Windorah first, because it's probably the most remote. It's 1,200 kilometres from Brisbane, 246 kilometres from Quilpie, 379 kilometres from Birdsville, 315 kilometres from Longreach. And those distances are probably important because one ingredient is a bun or a bit of bread. Quilpie, Birdsville and Longreach will be the closest bakeries to Windorah. Windorah doesn't even have electricity run off the main grid. It's got its own microgrid, operates on solar, batteries, battery storage and diesel generator backup. Population around about 100, truly starting to get a little bit remote. So we stayed for one night in Windorah, a Sunday night, and we dined down at the Western Star Hotel Motel. It was quite busy for a Sunday night in a remote location. We had this burger here. To be honest, it probably wasn't much of a burger, but you take into account all the restrictions that sit around it logistically, and we paid $23.25 for that. I'd have it again, so it can't be that bad. Just as a bit of a disclaimer, neither of us drink alcohol, neither of us drink soft drink, and we'd never pay for water. Dollars mentioned are for food alone. I thought for what we got it was on the expensive side of what we would be used to paying, but you need to take into account all of those things. However, bread was fresh, was quite edible, chips were fine. There didn't seem to be any beetroot and pineapple on any of the 4 compared burgers. Pineapples and beetroot, almost quintessential for Australian burgers. The big Godfather of burgers is a little bit different. It's definitely a burger with a lot. In all of this, we and all consumers have a choice. We don't have to purchase anything. In the case of food, we would always be able to eat at our campsite, but we do like to spend a bit of money in places while we're out and about as well. But if we don't see value in what's on offer, we have that choice, as does everybody. Another small disclaimer, we don't complain. There's no complaints here. I'm more interested in taking responsibility for the decision, whether the decision be based on value, based on what the food looks like. You can expand that out into everything. So essentially, we made the decision, we draw that line in the sand. Well, why to make it? I'm responsible for it. We move on. The choice was always there to make the decision on the other side. Responsibility to me is the key. You'll live a much more balanced and settled life. As an aside, just looking at the whole value proposition, we paid $35 for the night and fuel was $2.19 a litre. If you're looking at fuel, that's why I put Brisbane in there. Fuel would come from Brisbane to Quilpie, where Lowe's have a big depot, Quilpie to Windorah. You can line up for many, many kilometres when big things are on at Birdsville, like the Big Red Bash and the Birdsville races. Marion Bay down on the Yorke Peninsula, kind of the bottomish of the Yorke Peninsula, around about 200 permanent residents in Marion Bay, but I would say that fluctuates pretty readily when the tourist season's on. It's 288 kilometres to Adelaide, 281 kilometres to Port Pirie, which I'd rate as the 2 port zones. Now, this burger was sensational. It's got the pickle, the bacon. I think that's a cos lettuce, but as I said, I am a common man. Most excellent chips, and the side thingamajig of dipping tomato sauce for dipping your chips in, or perhaps I was supposed to peel the top off said burger and pour all over the top. I don't get into the aesthetics of it, so long as it's edible and able to be consumed. Anyway, it was a cracking burger, and we paid $24 for that. We did have to drive 33 kilometres for it though. We were camped up at Daly Head. That camping there was $20.40 a night with only drop toilets, but one of the best places we camped at in South Australia, I paid $2 a litre neat. Now we're going to move on to a little place called Belyando Crossing. Belyando Crossing sits on the Gregory Development Road. The Gregory Development Road essentially runs from Emerald in central Queensland, big mining grain centre, all the way through to Charters Towers in North Queensland, which once was a big mining town, today a big cattle centre. Now, I'm going to give a lot of distances here because they're all relevant. Belyando Crossing is essentially just a service station and a shop, restaurant and bar. It's got some accommodation. I counted about 200 rooms, but they were all empty when we were there. Little caravan camping area with power and water, access to toilets. No power, no water sites down the back. Don't know what they cost. So it's 1,100 kilometres from Brisbane and 333 kilometres from Townsville. And it's two port zones. Because the fuel price gets interesting a little bit later on. It's 198 kilometres from Charters Towers, 176 kilometres from Clermont, 278 kilometres from Emerald. Emerald to Charters Tower is 477 kilometres. Clermont to Charters Towers is 374 kilometres. Emerald to Clermont is 110 kilometres. All those numbers become relevant when we talk about the price of fuel, which is aside from the burger, I know, but it's probably important as we talk about location pricing. So Charters Towers, Clermont and Emerald all have bakeries closer to Belyando Crossing than what Windorah has. Of course, the flip side of that is in a location with no established township finding employees, so that kind of hits you with a bit of a stick. And so this is the burger we had at Belyando Crossing. The guy behind the bar said, "You'll never get a bigger one." We'll get onto that shortly. You won't be able to eat it. He either hasn't been out too much or he's just stretching the truth a little bit. Certainly not the biggest burger we've had or seen. There was nothing wrong with it. It was reasonable, quite tasty. There's a reasonable amount of chips. There's a little bit of barbecue sauce spillage on one of my chips there. But $28, and that's the dearest we paid for a burger. So when you tie it in with what I'd look at as the rest of the business model, the fuel's outrageous. $2.69. Now, he's got a great forecourt for selling fuel. Truckies run up and down the highway, plenty of room for them to sleep there. So you could capture that market if you try a little bit harder on food purchases, perhaps. And as far as accommodation at the back's concerned, we've been there a few times. It's also a good rest stop. It has grown significantly since our first visit there in 2014. And I asked him, "Mate, is that for the Carmichael mine, the Adani show, which is possibly the closest mine to the place?" He said, "No, we built that for road workers." Gee, there'd want to be a lot of road work going on to be filling that up. It was very empty when we were there. So he was charging $2.69 a litre for fuel. Paid $1.90 in Clermont and $1.93 in Charters Towers. Didn't buy any in Emerald. My point being, you don't need to buy fuel there unless your consumption is outrageous. To me, the fuel business model seems to be a gotcha sort of a moment because the service station doesn't appear on apps, but his fuel's about 70 cents a litre outside the game. When we were there, I checked Birdsville, the same price as Birdsville, which is in the middle of nowhere with a captive fuel audience. This is not illegal. It's quite legal in Australia to derive any margin you possibly can. Sometimes it works, depending on what industry you're in or what location you're in, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the market reacts against you. And I can't quite understand how the market has allowed, if fuel is a big part of his business, a 70-cent discrepancy from a place a couple of hundred kilometres down the road. It's interesting. So we are allowed to make profits in Australia. We camped there for $36. I don't know what the no power, no water sites down the back were worth. It was okay, but not as hyped. Yunta, South Australia. So it's on a reasonably major trucking route from Adelaide. You'd sort of say through to Brisbane, but there's alternate routes as well. So Yunta is 320 kilometres from Adelaide and 198 kilometres from Broken Hill. We camped across the road from the Yunta Hotel for $5 and fuel I paid $1.93 per litre in Yunta. So when the pub opened at 3 p.m, it's not open all the time, we ducked over to see if they were doing meals, and the guy said, "Well, yeah, usually my wife's the cook. She's just had a friend drop in and she's right on the piss at the moment." Righto, no worries, we'll come back and see how she's going a little bit later on. So come back we did. Cooking she was. She put together this set of burgers and chips, probably the biggest we've had, and they did take some getting down, all for $15 each, and a huge amount of chips. I'd be more than happy to cut back on the chips. And you can see on that burger there, it's got the generous helpings of onion squeezing at the side, the egg, the tomato, the lettuce, all for $15. $15. So Yunta is a clear winner on the burger steaks. Similarly remote, probably even more remote than Belyando Crossing. Not as remote as Windorah. Probably, I don't know, Marion Bay faces some logistics issues. There's no bakery at Marion Bay that's possibly coming from Minlayton, to check with the locals on pronunciation. A young couple also camped across the road at Yunta, came across and dined at the pub. The pub was quite busy actually for dinner, and they ordered, I think it was a pork belly something or other. These meals were just massive. Made my aorta contract rather violently as I looked at how much was on their plate. They doggy bagged pretty much 4 meals. It was huge. So Yunta, great place to eat. Clearly Yunta wins the whole value proposition and the burger proposition. Great burger, great food at the pub, reasonable fuel price for where it is. Fort Zone out of Adelaide, and $5 to camp. No, I think that was suggested. It was just camp beside the shit house across the road. Number 2 would be Marion Bay. You might note the Marion Bay burger has the pickle, which seems to be important to some people. Doesn't worry me too much. I am a food demolisher. My wife's a little more gentle, uses the knife and the fork to cut it up. I just get amongst it, get it down as quick as I can. The thing often deconstructs while I'm eating it, biting one side, squeezes out the other. Scoop it all up with your hands. I see that makes me uncouth. I see lots of stuff going around social media about people eating food with their hands. Don't come and sit near me when I'm eating. You'll be upset. I'm happy to give people something to be offended by. It doesn't trouble me at all. So Marion Bay at number 2. Coming in at number 3, I've almost got to put the $28 burgers at Belyando Crossing, because the ones at Windorah weren't that big, so it's going to come in at number 4. In the case of Windorah, I certainly appreciate the logistical difficulties in just getting buns and understanding how many buns you might need. Tough business. Now for my special mention, and we zoom back down into South Queensland and we talk Nindigully. Now Nindigully's got a permanent population of 9. Queensland's oldest continually licensed hotel, the Nindigully Hotel, the Nindigully pub. Free camping out the side, brings in a lot of caravanners and people in tents, camp on the Moonee River. In days gone past, there was an event there called the Nindigully BNS. Unsure how someone wasn't killed in those days or drowned, but seemed to have got by. There's no shop at Nindigully, it's just a pub. It's 505 kilometres from Brisbane. There's no fuel to purchase there. 157 kilometres from Gundawindi. There's a bakery in Gundawindi. 46 kilometres from St George. There was a bakery in St George, but it's recently closed down. 96 kilometres from Dirranbandi. There's a bakery there. And 72 kilometres from Mungandai. And there's a bakery there. Nindigully is also famous for having the movie Paperback Hero, starring Hugh Jackman, shot there. And there's bits and pieces still there. I'll see if I can dig up a photo or two. So today we're going to talk about the Road Train Burger. This big bastard represents Australian burger royalty. I understand as of this point in time, the 28th of October, the Road Train Burger is off the menu, and that possibly could be related to closure of the St George Bakery, but they hope to have it back on soon. There's some other heart attack type burgers there as well, but this Road Train Burger, every time I see a picture of it, I can feel my heart palpitating, I can feel my aorta squeezing up. So this thing weighs 5.5 kilos, feeds 4 to 6. Be interesting for us to go and buy one and see how long it would last. We'd certainly get more than 3 meals out of it. It's got a 1.2 kilogram meat patty. The bun is 1 kilo. You need to order ahead 3 to 4 days because they got to get the bun ordered. Had a deal going with the St George Bakery. That's why I think that may be the issue. It's only my opinion. 6 tomatoes. That's 6. Don't know how big the tomatoes are. Obviously tomatoes come in various sizes. A whole iceberg lettuce. That's your fibre. It says it has 3 beetroot, but I'm guessing it's come out of a tin as well. It certainly is a bit of a process, boiling up beetroot and making the juice, cutting it up. A tin of pineapple, not sure what size tin of pineapple, they come in various sizes. 400 grams of cheese, that's almost a half a kilo of cheese. 400 grams of cheese, there's a couple of days of constipation. That's a 0.882 of a pound, or 14.1096 ounces for our American brothers and sisters. My heart's starting to stop right now. Barbecue sauce, I'm not too sure how much. 1 kilo of potato wedges, 1 kilo. I have heard of one chap, I think he drove from Newcastle, which is a solid drive, just to have a crack at it, and he got through it on his own. We were sitting there having dinner one night in the dining room. We usually eat out in the beer garden area, and this couple came in. They said they were from Rockhampton and they'd come to have a crack at the Road Train Burger. This burger actually looks decidedly different to the one in the brochures. But this photo and the night was some time ago. They sat down, they had a couple of beers each. The road train burger arrived. They demolished it over the next 45 minutes to an hour without any theatrics at all. Ate it all, just two of them. Then had a couple more beers before they headed off to camp for the night. That was a solid performance. I'm not sure whether they needed their stomach pumped. It's quite a way to a hospital. St George would be the nearest hospital, and then going to Windy. But it is a mammoth thing. Almost takes on a life of its own. Last time I checked was $135. You combine it with the Great Australian potato shortage, bakery changes. When it comes back on the menu, not too sure how much it's going to be. We are in the midst of a potato shortage in Australia here in 2025. Dry weather in South Australia, weather in Queensland, disease in Tasmania, and of course, while probably not adding to the shortage, there's been some militants from potato farmers in Tasmania believing they're not being paid enough by the giants McCain and Simplot, and knowing how big corporations work, they're probably right. I saw something in comments recently on a chap reviewing burgers that Australian burgers should be called sandwiches because in America they'd be called sandwiches. Well, here in down under Ausland, where we could be described as a little strange, they're burgers, they'll always be burgers. You see, where we are on the globe, kind of on the downside of the round bit, we're sort of upside down, so our blood's constantly running to our heads. That plays a big role in what makes us stupid down here in Australia. I hesitated to say that because there'll be people that'll believe it, but anyway, I've said it. So there's my little burger expose as I talk about food for the common man, or in my case, as I'm known as a bogan, and my brother-in-law has given me that label, and that's quite fine by me. I'm happy to play the game. So that's it. Look out for more food for the common man coming your way. Stuff like how I like my fish and chips out of a cardboard trough, our very recent meal of corned beef or corned meat, one of my favourites, and how it gets used in multiple ways in our house. And just a really fun fact, as I converted that 400 grams of cheese to pounds and ounces, litres and gallons are much more interesting. A US gallon is not as big as an imperial gallon, which would have been the gallon we would have used in Australia before we went to the metric system, as we talk petrol prices, of course. So an imperial gallon, Britain, Australia, all those sorts of places, when we were on gallons, 4.54609 litres. A US gallon, 3.78541 litres. So US miles per gallon, 100% not the same as Australian miles per gallon, for those that still talk miles per gallon, or British miles per gallon. And of course, you've got to take into account currency exchange rates. Anyway, just thought I'd finish off with that fun fact.